In my less than a year of being the bishop now, I've spent quite a bit of time trying to learn about the history of this diocese. It was one of the first things that I was aware of when I was sent to the Diocese of St. Augustine, that history of the beginning of Catholic faith and the celebration of Mass in what would become the first parish of this country. As I've learned more specifically about the history of this parish, I've also been impressed to learn that it goes back to those early days, that as the faith began to spread and mission communities were established, this area was already beginning to practice the Catholic faith in those missions. And eventually, as it kind of moved into a next phase of establishing the faith here in this part of God's kingdom, it moved into celebrations in people's homes. And so there's a list of names of people who hosted the priests that would come. In those days when we were mission territory, as bishop was responsible for far-flung lands, and priests would move around very large areas to teach and celebrate. Eventually, when the diocese was initiated, then the faith began to be celebrated here very quickly with the very first bishop of our diocese. And what I see in that history is that at every stage, we have had faithful people, priests who have responded to God's call and gone into difficult situations, and people who were ready to host and celebrate and pass on the life of faith. As we gather today to celebrate the patronal feast of St. Patrick, it's important that we remember and celebrate the history of your parish, but that we also recognize in our faith every celebration of history is not just a remembering of what took place in the past, but rather it's a recognition that we are a people of faith, a people who believe in a God of an eternal present, that this moment in history, in the mind and eyes of God, is connected well beyond just the remembrance of our past. It is about the very same God active among his people who is present here with us today. And so we celebrate that God gives us the gift of this moment. And we pray that we will have the same kind of fidelity as we look ahead, as we try to continue and pass on the faith that we have received, the faith that we hold that we cherish, so that for generations to come, we may continue to build on the work that God has always been doing among his people. And as we look to this moment, as we celebrate where we have been, where we are, and where we are going, I want to reflect on the history of our patron in particular, as a role model for us and for all our hopes for continuing the life of faith. St. Patrick is often in today's world not seen as much more than kind of a cultural artifact, to say that there is this Irish heritage spread around the world. But that cultural heritage that we celebrate would not exist if not for the holiness of the man who we hold as our patron. The story of St. Patrick often is not as well known as it should be, because it is truly inspiring, and it should be challenging to help us carry on the faith in our own time. St. Patrick was living his life without much thought to his future when he was kidnapped, taken into custody and forced into slavery in Ireland. He had no desire to spend his days in Ireland, and he was forcibly taken there. And it was in his forced labor in Ireland that he began to awaken to the reality of God. And it was there, in what seemed to be the worst imaginable situation for him, that he became conscious of God and began to hear the voice of God preparing him for something he could never fully have imagined. Eventually, he would credit the intervention of God with what it took for him to escape from his slavery in Ireland. He returned to his homeland in England, and his family was happy to welcome him back. But they were shocked to learn that his newfound faith and his new awareness of God caused him to tell his family, I'm going to return to Ireland. I'm going to return to the very people who held me captive, the people who threatened to take away everything from me. God is now sending me to give them everything that they lack. And so he prepared himself for priesthood and for the work of a missionary. And then he returned to the land that God had prepared for him. And he faced many, many challenges as he tried to overcome the beliefs of that land in that time, a very generic kind of sense of the spirit that filled the world around them, but no sense that that spiritual reality was in fact a personal and loving God. So St. Patrick went back and he began to teach them that the real God is the God who comes to us as Father, Son, and Spirit. That the real God is the one who invites us not just to acknowledge his presence around us, but to enter in the kind of relationship that comes with speaking of God as Father, with understanding God as a son in a relationship, with a God who calls us to be sons and daughters in our own lives. He laid out for the people of Ireland a richness of faith that they never could have imagined. And he overcame every obstacle so that they were able to embrace the truth that had not yet been revealed to them. And so fully did they embrace the richness of this Catholic faith that the country would eventually become known as an entirely Catholic country. And it was future generations of missionaries that took the seeds planted by Patrick and helped them spread around the world. Here, in this part of God's kingdom, we were reliant on missionaries who came, like Patrick did, to make known the message of the gospel in this place. And like Patrick, many of them faced hardships, challenges, threats to their very existence, and yet they persevered. It was those Irish priests and bishops that were present that allowed this first community to be named as St. Patrick, to claim that heritage that not only connected them to a place, but to a person who was a great missionary and witness. Patrick then gave his entire life to making the message of the gospel known. So as we gather today to celebrate this heritage, we thank God for his continued work among his people. We thank God that he spoke into the heart of Patrick that motivated him to begin this missionary work against all odds, to the very people that had tried to take away his life. To those people, he went with a mission of mercy. And as he went back to the country of Ireland, he modeled the very witness of Jesus himself, who from his cross forgave those who would crucify him, who from his cross forgives us as we turn away from the plan of God in our lives. Fortunately, we have a God who works through our weaknesses, who works through the challenges of our life, and he gives us grace so that we can grow to know the will of God in our lives, that we can pursue the will of God by the manner in which we live. And so as I come to celebrate with you for the first time as your bishop, I'm grateful for the history that we have lived, but I'm even more grateful for the fact that the very same thing that gave them strength and motivation to embrace and share the faith is what God gives to us in this moment. We are the ones today that God looks upon and says, I have for you a gift of grace. I have for you a life of mercy. I have for you an understanding of the one God who is creator of heaven and earth as your Father, as the one who brings you into the family of God to be sons and daughters. And so that same grace that began the life of faith in the country of Ireland is one that we celebrate today, but that we embrace for our moment in history. So that strengthened by all that God gives to his faithful people, we can live the faith more fully. We can embrace what it is that God asks of us now in this time and place. So that by the witness of our lives, by living in such a way that the people in this community see that we are sons and daughters of God, that their eyes might be opened, that their ears might be ready to hear, that just like those early people heard the strange message of Patrick and embraced the true faith, that the people we speak to may understand the true faith that we cherish, that by our witness, generations to come may know the power and love of God. And so we ask St. Patrick for his prayers as a saint, that we may follow the model that he gave, that we may honor him not only in our remembrance, but honor him by following the example of his complete commitment to Christ.